was muted the whole time. I was muted the whole time. This is the benefit of live demos, and I apologize, everybody. So, as I said at the beginning, good afternoon, and thank you for attending. Per this slide, feel free to ask questions during our webinar. Take advantage of the GoToWebinar control panel here and ask those questions. We have a team of support as well as sales folks standing by ready to answer those questions. I'm going to ask that Bobby, who's here with me, that if we get a question that's pertinent to something we're talking about, that he goes ahead and asks me that. But otherwise, we'll get to him at the end. If you have more detailed questions, whether they're technical in nature or not, feel free to email support@domotz.com as well. Let's go ahead and get started. So today's agenda, this is how we typically form up these webinars, is we're going to talk a little bit about why Domotz, how Domotz works. We're going to talk a little bit about the problems that you guys face as service providers. So please recognize where some of these, as we work through Domotz, how they may apply to some of the questions that people have, whether it's working with a new customer and assessing what their network looks like, to having service level agreements in place and what you do before and after and during that SLA. We'll talk a little bit about how Domotz helps with efficiency and standardizations. We'll get to a few of the new features and integrations that are coming up, but I want to spend more time answering questions that people get. We find that we have usually quite a few questions that come in. So all that being said, I wanted to say, unfortunately, Giancarlo can't be with us today. He would normally be with us on our bi-weekly webinars, but we've got Bobby standing by to help us on some of the technical questions and any sales related questions. And I am JB Fowler, so I'll be working with you today on this. Let's talk a little bit about what Domotz is, what our value proposition is. Fundamentally, Domotz is a remote network monitoring system. We fundamentally monitor the network infrastructure for systems and networks that you guys are deploying, whether you're a managed service provider and you're in charge of the network at a company, or whether you're a commercial integrator and you're just dealing with parts of the network or devices or systems that may be on that network. We're ultimately helping you build out a solution that, as you'll see at the end, helps you be more efficient and helps build customer loyalty. The way we do that is, one, by having a really good understanding of all the assets that are on the network. We focus a lot of our value on what we call IoT discovery, or the network-based system discovery, and the classification of those devices, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the demo. We work really hard to make sure that you are seeing problems before your customers see the problems. It's about proactively monitoring these systems and alerting you to systems that may be down, maybe in a troubled state. And we'll talk about how we do that too. Once a system is down, and this is really where your service level agreements come in place, right? How can you very efficiently access that network without having to do a truck roll? How can you securely connect to that system and then manage that network-based system, whether it's the network infrastructure itself or devices that are on that network? Really, it's about helping you be more efficient, right? Helping you build that customer loyalty, making you look like the hero. And if we can help you do all that quickly and help you troubleshoot problems while lowering your operational costs, then we feel like we've done our job. So I'm super excited to talk to you guys about that. And with that being said, let's go ahead and break into the demo. Excellent. So we've got a couple questions that you're going to see come up on screen. It really helps me kind of focus the demo on your industry, what it is you do. So if you can answer these along the way, it's great. There'll be another question that comes up pretty soon about whether you're familiar with Domotz or not. So that way we could either do a little bit more advanced discussions or not. So, or more beginning discussions. Looks like a lot of our people here are probably from the managed service provider space, so more familiar with network management and understanding those types of systems. We'll talk a little bit about integrations as well as we get in here. So what you see on screen here is the Domotz interface. People often ask about Domotz and how we work. Fundamentally, Domotz is a cloud cloud-based solution. All of our intelligent resides in the clouds. We're hosted on AWS. For those that are curious, we've got deployments or what I should call cells that are in North America, which deal with a lot of the privacy and frankly speed considerations that go on in North America. We also have a cell that's hosted in Europe to deal with things like GDPR and the privacy and regulations that are associated there. That cell in Europe also covers the rest of the world, parts of Asia. We also have tentacles that branch off those cells to help with performance in all different regions of the world. So performance for us is a priority, and we make sure that we have that infrastructure in place to manage that. The thing you're looking at here is the Domotz application. This is the second part of the Domotz solution. It's this application that's communicating with the cloud and understanding the status of all the sites that you may be monitoring. One thing I'll point out here, which is really the third part of the Domotz solution, these little dots. These dots are what we call agents. There needs to be a single agent per network that is deployed. So you have one network agent per network that you're monitoring. We'll talk about it in more details. That network agent can monitor multiple VLANs, can monitor other subnets. That question always comes up. We'll talk a little bit about that, but fundamentally know that we're a cloud-based service. We've got multiple applications. I'm showing you the desktop application on Windows or on a Mac, but we also have a Windows-based application. We even have mobile applications. So your iOS and Android phones can have the same type of UI. And then of course there's that agent. So it's those three components that make up our architecture here. When we look at the UI, the dots that I'm showing on the screen here, you see simple, it's a NOC view, a Network Operations Center, red, yellow, green status. This is a multi-tenant view, meaning that I can look at multiple agents, multiple customers at one time. We do that on purpose because as a service provider or as a commercial integrator, you're usually not dealing with just one customer. You're dealing with multiple customers out there. We make it as easy as possible for you to understand the status at a high level with what's going on each customer. Red, yellow, green, stoplight chart type status. Red means that the agent itself is no longer communicating with our cloud. Could be because of a power outage, could be because the ISP is down. There's lots of reasons why that could happen. When an agent is green, it means that everything's running as expected. Where it gets interesting, I think, is when you have a site that goes yellow. Usually means there's an important device that you've classified or a system that is offline. It could also relate to security issues that we've discovered on that network. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. This is the fundamental dashboard or the beginning dashboard at the NOC level, the multi-tenant level. When we go into a network agent, as we click on a site and we start to interrogate what's going on in that network, we're looking at a dashboard that relates now more to the network. The thing that I want to say here, and we'll talk about this as we start to work through some of the problems that you're dealing with, you'll see that a lot of the information that's up on the screen here is very network centric. You're looking at what important devices on that network are offline, how many devices are there, what's the network topology look like, how do I connect to these devices? We'll talk about all of that during this demo. The way I want to phrase this up though is the very first thing that happens when you activate the agent, when you activate that network agent with your account in the cloud, the very first thing that we do is we start to look at all of the different devices. Essentially, we're looking at a layer 2 level and looking at all the MAC addresses that are out on that network. Why is this important? Well, if you remember when I talked about at one of the challenges that I think service providers as well as integrators deal with is what's the landscape? What does this network look like? What type of job am I walking into? How big is this customer? They may only have 10 employees, but if they've got 300 network-based devices out there, that's a very different type of job than dealing with a company that has 300 employees and only 10 devices that you have to manage and deal with. So Domotz really helps give you an inventory and from an asset perspective of what this customer looks like, what you are dealing with. When we discover all of these devices, some of the very first things that we'll do, we do what's called an Arp Request. We're looking for MAC addresses at the layer 2 level on the network stack. We will take all those MAC addresses. We will figure out what their IP addresses are. We'll look at all the Bonjour protocol, or Bonjour, I should say the application layer protocols like Bonjour, MDNS, zero comp, things of that nature, and we'll report back that information as that device is communicating across the network. More importantly, we're not just returning MAC addresses. We take advantage of the classification algorithms that we have to bring back make, model, and more importantly, type of that device. This is what really helps differentiate Domotz from the other solutions that are out there. By classifying these devices, it makes it easier for you to deploy. It makes it easier for you to understand what are these types of systems that I'm dealing with. If there are 300 devices on the network, if 150 of them are video security cameras, that's a very different problem than if 250 or 300 of them are endpoints and PCs. So these are the types of things that you can start to use Domotz for when assessing the customer's situation. When we discover these devices, right, after we've classified them, we start to interrogate them further. We start to look at which ports on these devices are open and available for management. Fundamentally, we're looking at this for management purposes. Can we use command line interfaces like Telnet or SSH? Do we use web portals, whether they're secure or not? On PCs or laptops, is remote desktop protocol or RDP open and available on these? We can access these devices, these network-based systems through these protocols directly through Domotz, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. When it comes to the network infrastructure, obviously Domotz being a network management solution has to be able to look at the network infrastructure. We will discover managed switches, we'll discover firewalls, we'll discover wireless access points. We'll also interrogate them at an Snmp level. The reason we do that is so that we can start building out a topology of the network that you're about to manage or you are managing. With Domotz, you can see where these MAC addresses, so I just focus on this switch because it has those cameras that we were looking at. You can see that we have security cameras tied to these ports. We can see how much power is being consumed via PoE. In fact, I'll make a side note here that at this point we can also power cycle these devices. So I can actually turn off a particular device if I wanted to. We do the same thing, and we'll talk about this, especially in the commercial integration space for PDUs or power distribution units as well. We interrogate something like 13 to 15 different Snmp sensors on these devices. We look at things like bandwidth being allocated across these ports. We look at errors or packets being discarded. We aggregate that over the course of a month or 30 days and place that in the graph, so that way you can help with debugging purposes. Ultimately, what we're trying to do, if I go back to the main dashboard, is fundamentally build out a topology. This, we think, helps you from not only a sales and marketing perspective with your clients, letting them better understand what their networks look like, but it also helps you debug and understand. If you have, if you are tying switches together in a, let's call it serial fashion, and one goes down, you know how that affects the rest of the network. If you're doing things in parallel, right, you can see which devices fall off of certain switches. It's all about debugging and helping you build that. This particular network, we call it our Iot Lab. Look, it's my house. I've got lots of toys here, and we use it to do a lot of the testing for our development purposes, and it's why I like to show this. There's a lot of good information that comes from this chart here. We can, as I said, focus on wireless access points, looking at systems like Ubiquiti, Meraki. Here I'm looking at Ruckus. We do access networks, right? What we can do is, as we look at a wireless access point, we can interrogate these devices, look at which devices are connected to which radios, from the radio's point of view, which frequencies they're on, which channels they're on. We can even go as far as looking at things like signal strength. So we can see what's considered to be the RSSI value. Very useful when it comes to debugging wireless devices in a network, things that may be dropping packets. So this is all very, we think, helpful information when it comes to understanding the network itself. One last thing I want to talk about before we go into kind of the next subject is that of VLANs and subnets. I did mention that Domotz can look across VLANs. We can look across subnets. For those that are familiar with managed switches, you know that if you're configuring a VLAN, you need to make sure that the managed switches and the ports are tagged appropriately. Whether you use trunked, hybrid, whatever you want to call them, type ports, you need to make sure that the switch is configured appropriately. You also need to make sure that the Domotz agent, whether you're running that agent on a Windows machine, whether you're running that on our little black box, or you're running that in a Linux based system, you do have to make sure that the network interface card that the agent is tied to is configured appropriately to see VLANs. So we get that question quite a bit, so I thought I'd bring that up here now. You also can take Domotz and look across subnets. So if you don't want to look at a specific VLAN and you do want to keep a network segregated from your primary LAN, you can still use Domotz to look across that. Now, just be aware that when you're looking at a subnet, you're inherently looking at a layer 3 implementation, which means you're really only looking at IP addresses, you're not looking at MAC addresses. When you do that, we will discover devices on that subnet, but we may not enrich it or classify those devices in the same way, and that just has to do with the inherent technologies behind layer 2 versus layer 3 and how we do our algorithms. Really useful though for looking at things like modems, really useful for looking at point of sale systems where you're dealing with PCI compliance, really useful for dealing with security systems where you have static IP addresses and you want to make sure that particular systems or cameras are online or not as appropriate. So that's something we can do. The other thing that I want to point out here is you do have the ability to look at external hosts as well through Domotz. This becomes really interesting if you want to monitor servers that may be off-site. This becomes useful if you want to monitor your servers that are on-site, but from an outside point of view. You also can use this in the whole work from home environment. In fact, we saw this quite a bit over the last year where a Domotz agent was placed at a residence or an employee's home network, and then looking back towards the office to make sure that VPN connections, make sure that servers were working appropriately. Systems like BlueJeans, right, for voice over, or I should say unified communications, making sure that they were functioning properly. We could do all that through Domotz. So this is just another tool that Domotz offers when it comes to looking at VLANs, subnets, or external hosts or external IP addresses. So good stuff there. That really covers a lot of kind of the first part of the discovery of devices. I think you guys can see how you can start to use it to not only assess what a network looks like, especially from a topology point of view, but also helps give you an inventory, right? And we're going to talk about some of the integrations, but that inventory list becomes very useful when it comes to documentation systems for obvious reasons. Let's talk a little bit about service level agreements. Once you have an SLA in place, right, it's likely because you have a contract with this client to make sure that their systems are up and running. Domotz helps you ensure that these systems are up and running. The way we do that is through what I would consider to be alerts, but then ultimately about remote connectivity and that management. Alerts are a big deal within Domotz. We have multiple ways of configuring alerts. We also have multiple ways of receiving alerts. Let's talk at a high level. Two major types of alerts that you'll see under the alert tab are these network and device alerts. Let's talk about networks at first. These network alerts really are generated around what the agent is doing, what the agent is seeing. If the agent loses connectivity to the cloud, that would be a connection lost or recovered. If a new device is discovered on that particular network, which by the way could be a security concern as well, depending on the network you're looking at, that is from the point of view of the agent. Anytime we see ports being open from a cloud or a WAN perspective, or even from the inside out, right, at the firewall level, we can alert to that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. Both of those are kind of security issues on the network as a whole. We also can look at network performance. When we say network performance here, we're really talking about ISP performance, so your internet service provider. We can regularly test. In fact, once every 6 hours, we'll issue a test to the network, and we'll look to see how the ISP is performing and report on that. You can disable it, but if for some reason performance drops below a certain threshold, you can get an alert on that. Let's talk about device alerts real quick. The devices that are out there, when you're looking at particular devices, and we can just grab one randomly. Oops, excuse me. Let's look at, we'll look at the Blu-ray player, I guess. When you set up alerts, let's go to the custom page here. It's very easy for you to set up whether the device goes online or offline. We can even look at whether the heartbeat is lost. I do often point out here, heartbeat loss is something that should only be used on what I would consider to be mission critical devices. It's much more reliable and less of a pain for you if you're looking at just when the device goes offline. Essentially, a heartbeat loss means that when we ping that thing over a course of 3 pings, and that's all within a few seconds, that we've lost communications to it. Whereas when a device goes down, it means that we've issued multiple heartbeats and the device did not recover. Usually that comes over the course of 2 to 3 minutes, 2 minutes typically. So keep that in mind as you are setting or thinking about device goes down versus heartbeat lost. IP address change. So if you have static reservations, if you have static IPs, if for some reason those things change, that could be the sign of a security issue. It could be somebody messing with the network. Right? It's up to you to decide whether you want to grab an alert on that. Some of the more powerful parts of Domotz, though, have to do with what we call eyes, right? The looking at of these devices, the interrogation of these devices at a TCP level. So we can look to see if a device has a web page running. We can look to see if RDP is open. We can look to see if Telnet or SSH is available or not. Other services that maybe you've programmed into a system or custom ports that may be on a system, we can look at that and interrogate those. And if they go down for whatever reason, we can alert to that. Where many, many people start to look at Domotz, though, is through Snmp. In fact, let me go to this particular device. So I use this device because it's a network-based temperature humidity sensor, and they use Snmp by design. These types of alerts that we can set up are based on the values associated with Snmp sensors. One of the things you can do here is add Snmp sensors. We have MIBs for thousands of devices in our database. In this particular case, we can search something like temperature because this is a temperature-based device. It brings up the MIB. It also brings up all the potential OIDs and their, let's call them somewhat device-friendly names or human-readable names. We then can decide whether we want to add these. Now, I have some already here, so I'll just close out of this. But what you get is information on these. We start to interrogate these on a regular basis, and we build out graphs, right? Again, a 1 month history of these. It's these values that we can set sensor or alerts on, getting back to the alert discussion. So in this particular case, the temperature here, by the way, it's not 963 degrees, it's 96.3 because these OIDs are associated in tenths of a degree. When we go to set up an alert on one of those eyes, we can set it up so if that particular sensor is out of range, if it's equal to a certain value, if it's a string and it equates to a certain value, we can set alerts on those and bring awareness to you. How do we get those alerts, though? That's where I think it gets interesting. You'll notice that we've got mobile alerts and we've got email alerts here. The mobile alerts are for push notifications to your mobile app, to the Domotz mobile app. The email essentially gives you alerts to the account that you're signed in on here. Where the power of Domotz really comes in is when you start to deal with what we call shared alerts. Shared alerts allow us to take these alerts and go to ticketing systems. On the left-hand side of the Domotz application, you'll see that there's this shared alerts and ticketing systems. More often than not, these shared alerts are going into a PSA tool. You can see the contact channels that we have here. The way a shared alert works, and the reason we called it shared, is because you can set up multiple contact channels for these systems. You can go to a PSA tool. You can go to a messaging system, something like Slack or Microsoft Teams. You can go to general emails. In fact, most recently, we've released the messaging service of Telegram into our environment. If you are so inclined and you have some programming skills, take advantage of webhooks directly. Interface into something like Zapier or some other tool that can help do automation of alerts. So it's very simple to take a device goes offline event and then kick off another API call to another system that we either may not have integrations with, or you want to power cycle device. Maybe you want to power cycle multiple devices using our APIs that we'll talk about. You have that ability here. Services like Autotask, ConnectWise Manage, Synchro, Fresh Service, Freshdesk, right? These MSP-centric as well as enterprise-centric tools all have integrations within Domotz. In fact, a lot of commercial integrators may be familiar with services like Q360 or even Zendesk for ticketing systems. Domotz integrates very, very cleanly into those, and it's a nice way for you to take advantage of that dashboard that you're using there and put Domotz kind of on the backside, put it on automatic pilot so that it is, looking at the devices you care about, looking at the network itself, and when something happens, bringing attention to you through these services. To me, that's where shared alerts are so extremely powerful for you. One of the other types of alerts that Domotz has, if I go back to all of our agents, I like to go to our Draper office because we've got some Cisco systems here. I think this is the agent that I like to use. Within some of the networked devices, network managed devices, we also look at the configurations. So the configuration files of those devices. The beauty of this is, as a service provider, as somebody who has gone in and configured that network, we can show you when the configuration has changed. We can actually compare the different configuration files from the current running configuration to previous backups. In fact, once every 6 hours, we're polling the configuration file to see if it's changed. If it has changed, we download that configuration to the Domotz cloud. We can alert you to the fact that this has changed, which then allows you to go in and interrogate why that change may have occurred. So for us, we think that's pretty powerful. One more thing that I'll say about this, for those of you that have ever made a configuration change to the running config, but just forgot to save it to the startup config, listen up. We have enabled the ability to alert you when there's a misalignment between that running config and that startup config as well. So if you've gone and made those changes, you walked away from the job, you went home, whatever you did, we can bring alerts to that as well. And then what you can do eloquently with Domotz is actually log into the system even remotely, get into the device, which we'll talk about, and then save that configuration, all before a power cycle happens to mess up all that work that you may have done. Speaking of that, speaking of logging in, let's talk about that. Let's not mess up our switch that's here. Let's instead mess up the switch that's at my house. One of the things that Domotz can do now that you've generated these alerts is we can connect to these devices. As I mentioned at the very beginning, we have the ability, or when we scan all these devices, we look for all the ports that are available for management, and we bring that to your attention. These switches here on my network, I usually like to demonstrate because it's nice and clean. A couple of ways that we can connect to devices. Through Domotz, okay, we make a secure connection between your laptop, your mobile phone, however you're connecting to that device, to the Domotz cloud. Then from the cloud, we all go back down into the agent within, which then communicates to the devices in question. We can create a secure connection immediately by clicking the connect button through port 80 or Telnet and SSH. We'll bring up a browser. In fact, let me bring it up here, what came up here. So this created a secure connection between the office where I am and the IoT lab. We can then do whatever it is we need to do. If we want to go in and configure VLANs, lo and behold, we can get in there and do that. If, to the point I made earlier, if we wanted to come down into the startup configuration and save that off, right? We could go do that here. If we wanted to upload and make changes, we can do that. This created a secure, and by the way, you can see this URL here. This is a HTTPS, so it's a secure web connection that is unique to my laptop. If I take this URL here, try to pass it off to a colleague, even in the same office, it will not work for, it will not make that connection for him or her. It will only work on my laptop, and it's a temporary connection. So after we get out of there, it shuts down. Another way in which we can make connections, in fact, I'll bring this up kind of in the same vein as having a direct connection between my laptop and that device. We can create custom connections. So if we know that there's a unique port that we haven't discovered or something that just got enabled, if it's a secure port or maybe it's not, you can go enable that port right here and create that connection. If you need to do something a little bit more unique, and I think the commercial integrators that are online with us would understand this. If you're dealing with systems like Crestron, if you're dealing with Lutron, if you're dealing with AMX or Extron, you're really using third-party tools or the manufacturer's tools to program, to process, to do firmware updates to the systems that are deployed. It's very easy through Domotz to create a secure connection over specific ports. In fact, you can create multiple connections over these ports at the same time and use those third-party tools to program, manage, deal with those other systems. You don't need to open up VPNs through the IT department to do that. You can use Domotz for that. We've got great white papers on how to create these TCP tunnels and utilize that. This again creates a direct connection from your laptop to that device through the Domotz architecture, through the Domotz ecosystem. So be aware of that. There's one more thing that a lot of certainly service providers will recognize, and that is the notion of a VPN. We call this VPN on demand. A VPN is a virtual private network, as you would assume. In fact, it behaves like you would expect a VPN. The reason that this becomes a powerful tool for Domotz is you're not setting up common usernames and passwords inside your firewalls, inside your routers. This is a way that you can use the Domotz credentials, whether you've implemented them with two-factor authentication or you're using some of the services we'll talk about, like single sign-on type services or SAML. You're using those credentials for your team to connect into these networks. You're essentially turning the Domotz agent into a VPN host. And of course, you still need to have a VPN client. So you'll notice in my environment, I have TunnelBlick here because I'm on a Mac where we can create these connections. I won't do it now, but if I were to create this VPN tunnel, it essentially provides me with a secure configuration file that I then load into my VPN client, and then it creates that secure connection. One thing I want to say about all these connections, for security reasons, we've limited these connections to be 1 hour. We do that on purpose so that, again, there's not open holes, open, call them doorways, into a client's network, even if it's through your password protected laptop or server. So some things I wanted to say there about that. So with this, going back to this problem of SLAs and service level agreements, you should be able to see how Domotz can help set up alerts. You can use these to generate proactive alerts when a system is in a troubled state, whether it's online or offline, whether it's through Snmp sensors and you're interrogating that system more, or if there are services that are running. Even getting alerts on whether the temperature is too hot for a particular rack and you need to take action. You can do that those types of alerts. Ultimately, then it's about how can you log into the system securely to help service those service that situation that's in there. Let me segue a little bit. The segue I want to do is to this thing that's called the recovery paradox. Part of you will be very familiar with this, but I always like to talk about this because I really think this speaks to the value propositions that Domotz is trying to build when we talk about customer loyalty. You have a service level agreement in place with your customers because they expect you to have some level of service. And as long as you're doing your job, what this graph says is that that loyalty over time just naturally builds. But what's interesting is when you have a problem, right? If something goes wrong in that network, whether it's your fault or not, we often see that that loyalty from your customer decreases. This is a problem, but in problems become opportunities. So where Domotz helps you is how we help you recover. If we can, one, let you know that there's a problem before the customer calls, that just makes you look like a hero. But secondly, if the customer does call, the ability for you to better understand what's going on in that network, react quicker to the problem at hand, be able to securely log into that system, I think really provides the communications that ultimately enables this customer loyalty to go. The irony, well, the paradox, to use that word actually, behind all this is that when issues occur, if you respond effectively, loyalty actually increases. Your customers actually appreciate it. We believe that having a tool like Domotz helps really build that loyalty there. And these are two slides that I like to show because I think it gets to the fundamental value proposition of Domotz. Let me go back to the demo and let me speak to another way in which we can help with this loyalty. Find my mouse there. One of the things that Domotz does is we believe that communications to your customers is very important. In fact, even if nothing's going wrong, I think you need to be continuously communicating to your customers. We've built in this notion of reporting and logging. The nice thing about reporting and logging is that you, as a service provider, as an integrator, can use this for auditing. You can use it to understand who's gaining access to your systems, who's logging into these systems, what are they touching, what are they implementing, how are they getting in, are there notes being added, is your team doing what they said they would do for your customers? So this auditing aspect or this logging of who's gaining access, I think is really, really important for that. One of the things though that Domotz does is we can generate reports. We can do reports manually, meaning that you can send them off whenever you want and to whomever you want. It's very easy for you to show the last 30 days of information within a given network. You can set up the emails, but more importantly with these reports, you can say what parts of Domotz do I want to add to that customer report. If you don't care about WAN performance and your customer doesn't either, then turn it off. But if you do care about what are the devices that are on the network and how are they behaving, you can absolutely add that to the file that gets generated. You can add this activity log to show who's accessing the system. Why do I bring this up? It's really about that communication. And even if a customer, if nothing went wrong, letting them know that you are watching out for them, I think is a big aspect of communication, and it's what helps keep your customers with you for life, if you want them for life. So that's where, again, having that SLA, when it's time for the SLA to be over, how you can show them the work that you've done. And in addition, these reports also show what you haven't done. So it helps from an auditing point of view too. You can export, oh, by the way, if you don't want to do it manually, you can set up automatic reports. You can generate them on the first day of each month. Again, configuring who gets what on this particular agent and when they get it, or what they get in it, I should say. One thing that I didn't show you, which I want to bring to your attention now, because it's kind of along the same lines as reporting and asset management. One of the things that the Domotz app, the desktop application does, is it gives you the ability to export all of the devices that are in a particular network. So what it's doing right now is in the cloud, it's generating an Excel file. We'll save it here to my desktop. Let me bring up Excel, and then I'll open up that file for you. So let me go to my Mac, go to my desktop. It's already saved off there. Here we go. And then I'll share it on the screen here. Okay. The reason I bring this to your attention, a lot of a lot of service providers really appreciate this, not only because of the asset management reasons, but when it comes to configuring a site for the very first time, especially if you're walking into a job that's already there, this allows you to do things like modify the location, the zone. You can add notes to devices. You can do all of that right here in this Excel spreadsheet and then re-import that information. One thing I like to show, I always go back to these security cameras because quite frankly, every business has those, or they should. It's easy to filter on these types of devices, see what the inventory looks like, set the importance level. If you do have information about notes that you want to capture, username, passwords, whatever, you can do that here. But then when you save this file off, which I won't do it here, so I'm going to hit don't save, but what you can easily do then is go in and import that information right back into Domotz. Any of the changes that you made, whether it's zone, location, notes that got added, all of that gets captured right back into Domotz very, very easily. So you can use that as a essentially a provisioning tool. You can use it as a way to make mass notes, mass edits. So I like to show that as well, especially under this reporting and logging section. One of the ways to make sure you're helping your customers has to do with network security. And I touched base on this before, but let me talk about it here. We believe that Domotz fundamentally is a NOC. We're a network operations center. We're not trying to behave like a security operations center. We're not necessarily showing you where devices are communicating, meaning, you know, how are they reaching the internet and what are they doing? That's the job of firewalls. It's also the job of security operations centers. But we do believe that network vulnerabilities is an important part of your job. And we think that making sure that you're not exposing ports and that you're not exposing devices to the network that shouldn't be there is a really important aspect. We can give you a list of all the latest devices that have connected to the network and when they connected. As appropriate, we will classify these devices as best as possible and show when they arrive. You wouldn't necessarily care about this on a guest network, but if you're dealing with a video security VLAN or a security VLAN in general, if you're dealing with a LAN that's associated with a point of sale system, that may be something that is important to you. So looking at this tab to understand what devices are connecting to the network and how, very, very useful. Looking at TCP ports. In fact, let's just get off of this agent. Let's go look at one of these that have security issues. Looking at how open ports from the WAN side are on your network, we think is obviously a security vulnerability. If you're a service provider and you've deployed WatchGuard, you've deployed SonicWall, you've deployed Palo Alto, you probably have a pretty good handle on what ports are there and which ones aren't. Think about this as a secondary check. The Domotz cloud is looking back into the network, and if we see certain ports that are open, we're going to bring awareness to you so that you can then either accept or reject. If you reject it, the assumption is that you're going to fix that in the firewall and the router. We're not going to fix it for you. If you accept the port, then it's an understanding that, hey, this port is a known open port, it goes to a secure device, and we're not going to alert you to it again. So that's something that's there. And that's looking from the WAN back into the network. On the inside of the network, UPnP is a fairly legacy technology. You'll see in this example, it's used by Xbox, it's used by Skype, it's used by PlayStations, it's used by lots of different systems. The reason they use it is because it's a very simple way to associate a device to an external network through these ports, whether it's through UDP or TCP of some way, shape, or form. Domotz will alert you when a device requests UPnP. I fundamentally believe that you should just disable UPnP now. The Xbox, the PlayStation, they'll all work just fine without it, but that's just my opinion. You may need to do whatever you need to do for a particular system. We bring awareness to these open ports because we look at them as network vulnerabilities. The last thing we want is you to install a system that exposes your customers to a network security flaw. Cybersecurity is at the forefront of everybody's mind in the last couple of months. This is just another tool to help you understand that. We think that if you report to your customers about these types of things, even if you're not the owner of that firewall or router, they'll appreciate it. And again, bringing in that customer loyalty, letting them know that you're there for them, I think is a big deal. So that's that on the network security. In the last little bit here, I want to talk about efficiency and standardization. We believe that Domotz at a price point, around $29 a month, right, per agent, with all of the integrations that we've done, we think it's extremely cost effective. It scales with your business. The more sites that you're deploying, the easier it is for you to understand the management tools and use these tools. We're not charging you on a per endpoint. We're not charging you on a per network infrastructure device. It's simply on a per site or per network, fundamental network that you are looking at. One of the things that we do to help you as well is gives you the ability to look across all of your agents and understand what's out there. So if I type the word Cisco here, and in my environment, I certainly don't have many systems, but when we type the word Cisco, we look across all the agents that are out there that have the word Cisco associated with it, whether it's the manufacturer or it's in the name, and we can bring this information to you. We can even go as far as looking like application protocols that are being broadcast. So the word main here, if I scroll down and look back at my house, right, I've got an Apple TV 4K that within the application names, the word main is being broadcasted. So we really can interrogate these systems. And if we go back to this, we can actually do advanced searches. So if I look for Cisco, but I get too many and I want to dive into Cisco IP phones, I can absolutely do that. In this case, if I wanted to take this word main and associate that to Apple for whatever reason, I can do that, right? So these are ways in which we can dive down. I want to also point out one more thing before I tell you the real value here, and that is I can search across agents as well. So if I wanted to, let's say I had a customer that had 5 different sites. In this case, I'm going to use the word demo for here. We can click on a site. We can see all of the properties associated with that particular site, and we can then modify them right here in this screen. I can do the same thing at the network level. So if I wanted to look at a particular device, let's just take this phone. Oops, wrong button. If I took this phone, for instance, and I wanted to change some of the properties associated with Domotz, even if I wanted to change things like Snmp credentials, I can do all of that right here. I can look to see are Snmp sensors configured or not. Very, very powerful, but where this gets really exciting is when it comes to things like templating. So if you have a site, if you have a lab, if you set up systems in a certain way, it's very easy for you to take a particular system, in fact, I'll just use this main phone here, and export all of these settings and properties to your PC. You then can take that configuration file, and just like we did with that Excel file before, but if I wanted to take that configuration file and put it up to these devices, whatever these are, I can do that. I can import these directly and take advantage of that. So I've now taken an agent, I've taken even a specific device or multiple devices, and I can configure them once and push it across hundreds of devices at one time. If where it would make sense to do this is if you were dealing with network infrastructure devices and you wanted to change the Snmp credentials, you wanted to go from V2 to V3, and you needed to add the usernames to all of them, very easily done through this management interface. Ultimately, it's about building a tool for you to help better configure your systems and help you be more efficient when it comes to not only deploying devices, but also when it comes to managing those systems. All right, I think we are in perfect timing. Bobby, I think I'd like to understand from you if we've got questions that were asked. I noticed you did not interrupt me during the program, so maybe I was addressing things effectively. But what were some of the questions that you ended up getting that you thought would be useful for us to point out?
One of the questions we got quite a few times was if we have an IT glue integration, and if not, when that'll be released.
That's a great question. So yeah, with respect to IT glue, just to let everybody know, we are almost complete. In fact, I will tell you that as of tonight, we are complete. Tomorrow morning, we're releasing this to beta, what we call beta, internal beta. I would say that if you are interested in this integration that Domotz has done, please email our support team and our team will work with you. I'm really, really excited about the IT glue integration. I saw it in action the other day, and what I thought was so great about it is how we associated sites and devices together, and there's some unique integrations in there that I think you guys are going to see. So I'm pretty stoked about it. The way in which we synchronize the Domotz information from a documentation point of view and the IT glue information that you've put into that tool, it's really well done. You're going to see similar, or there are already similar integrations today with services like Hoodoo and IT Portal we're working with. So, you know, lots to come, but I know IT glue has been a big one, Bobby, and a lot of people have asked about that. So I fully appreciate that question there. What other questions did we get, Bobby?
Some of the questions we received were about the configuration management feature. What devices do we currently support for that, and what devices will we support in the future?
Very good one. So let me, I always like to go back if I can on this. So configuration management. So I showed that we have configuration management on the Cisco systems. All of the Cisco SG series and the Catalyst series, we have that for today. In this world, we've got it on the Luxel systems as well, just because of kind of our history with respect to some of our customers. We are continuing to add this to more and more of the enterprise grade managed switches. You see this configuration management also on firewalls. So I don't have a demo in my account, and I apologize that, but WatchGuard is available today where we can grab their configuration files, compare them. We're also adding that to SonicWall and some of the others that are out there. It's interesting because for a lot of the wireless access points, we've found that with Ubiquiti, Meraki, and these systems, there hasn't really been a need for Domotz to alert on that because of the way that they manage the systems. But for some of the products that come from services like HP and some of the others, we think that it's a very good addition. So we're looking at that as well. So great question, very good question. What else? Anything else, Bobby? Or okay. You know, one thing I didn't mention, Bobby, while you're looking at that, and I always try to do this. Let me go back to my browser here. One of the things that people often ask about is the APIs and how we use those. First thing I want to say about our APIs is that we've got a lot of, let's actually try to log into my portal. We've got some really good webinars on how to use our APIs, not only with respect to security cameras and how we can grab snapshots from those cameras. In fact, I'll show that in our, because I didn't show that to anybody here, but also just how you can create your own custom dashboards. So within the settings group within your portal, you'll see these API keys. And under this API reference guide, you'll see all of the APIs that are associated with the Domotz application. You essentially can build out your own custom dashboard. Now, where we see a lot of people using these APIs are to generate custom reports, to do automation if they want to power cycle PDU outlets, if they want to power cycle PoE ports. You can do that directly through these APIs by using scripting. We have a couple of use cases on our on our marketing webpage, so at domotz.com, where you can see how service providers have leveraged these APIs to build out these custom reports for showing security camera images. In fact, I always like to, I think some people often ask about some of the areas we differentiate from some of our competitors. And I think this is actually a really good time to show this. You'll notice that Domotz has quite a bit of AV integration. When we discover a security camera is on the network, we actually see if it's broadcasting some of the OnViv protocols. We can do things like grab snapshots from these cameras. So not only are we showing you that the device is online, you can interrogate it via Snmp or other services, but we can even give you a visual representation that the device is working properly and actually streaming video. So that's fairly cool. Some of the other things that we do, if I look at, like in this place, I've got video over IP with a company called Wirestorm. We do the same thing for Liberty, but we can interrogate the network. Well, that's not very interesting, but we can interrogate the network controller and see that the encoders are communicating with these decoders over the network. And if this Apple TV 4K #2 was tied to multiple endpoints, you would see that here. So just some things from a digital signage and commercial integration perspective that a lot of integrators really like. For a service provider, I think it's really useful because these are revenue generating opportunities for you. You may just be typically monitoring the endpoints like the PCs and laptops for antivirus. Now you can monitor the security network. That's a critical part of the business, and being able to monitor that is value for you. So I went on a bit of a tangent there based on that IT glue discussion, but that's where we are. Any other thoughts, Bobby? Or are we good? Because we're right at our mark. So we're good? All right. Well, thank you everybody for attending. We appreciate your time. I invite you to email support@domotz.com if you do have any further questions. If you have any sales related questions, feel free to email sales@domotz.com and we'll be happy to address those things. So thank you very much for your time. We definitely appreciate it, and I look forward to hearing from you again. Thank you.